in the Nile Delta, in the land of Goshen.
For centuries, one story has stood at the crossroads of faith and legend, an escape so daring, so impossible, it defies logic. The Red Sea crossing isn't just a tale from ancient scrolls. It's a mystery that has stirred hearts, sparked debate, and evaded proof until now. In a remote stretch of desert and sea, where the line between miracle and mystery blurs, new evidence has surfaced. But what exactly was found, and how does it connect to a location long hidden beneath the waves? Scientists and researchers have uncovered something that's causing a quiet storm in both biblical and archaeological circles. The clues are real, the location is surprising, and what lies beneath just might rewrite everything. Are you ready to follow the trail into the unknown? The land of Goshen. The land of Goshen, located in the fertile Nile Delta of ancient Egypt, served as a vibrant home for the Israelites during their early years in the region. Originally granted to them during the time of Joseph, who rose to power under a previous pharaoh due to his wisdom in averting a catastrophic famine, this area became a sanctuary for Jacob and his descendants. Genesis recounts that the Israelites prospered in Goshen, multiplying rapidly and living in relative peace. The region, rich in water and vegetation, allowed for flourishing agriculture and livestock, creating an ideal environment for the tribes of Israel to grow both in population and economic strength. However, this prosperity eventually attracted suspicion and resentment. As the years passed and Joseph's legacy faded, a new pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph, as described in Exodus chapter 1 verse 8. Viewing the Israelites' increasing numbers as a political and demographic threat, this new ruler enacted oppressive measures to suppress them. Forced into harsh slavery, the Israelites were made to build store cities like Pithom and Ramses, a stark shift from their previous autonomy. Pharaoh's fear led to cruel decrees, including the infamous order to drown every newborn Hebrew male in the Nile, intensifying their suffering. Such were the conditions that they grew in number, which only increased suspicion in the Egyptians, and their endurance of hardship is considered a reflection of divine favor and the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that he would have descendants like the stars for multitude. This is because, at this point in time, life within Goshen would be marked by the conflicting notions of abundance and deprivation. It was, on the one hand, a land of natural plenty, while on the other, the epitome of bondage and cruelty under Pharaoh's rule. The blessings of the land and the severity with which they treated there so made their yearning for liberation all the more keen. New archaeological inquiries into that region have once again opened a lot of debate on their presence in the Nile Delta. While the direct artifacts are debatable, studies cited by Patterns of Evidence and GB News still point to the possible existence of Semitic settlements in the eastern delta. The findings, combined with ancient Egyptian records of populations of foreign labor and historical famines, lend further credence to the biblical narrative. The land of Goshen became finally the crucible of suffering, which prepared the way for one of the most famous escapes of history, the escape from Egypt. But freedom was not simply handed to them. It began with a night that would change everything. The Exodus begins. The Exodus began with a mass departure from the Egyptian city of Ramesses.
It is Ramses who is traditionally known as the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
A pivotal moment following the devastation of the 10th plague. According to Exodus chapter 12 verse 37, approximately 600,000 Israelite men, not including women and children, set out on foot from Ramesses to Succoth, marking the beginning of their journey to freedom. Including families and the elderly, estimates suggest the group may have numbered over 2 million people. This mass migration was not only a physical relocation, but also a profound act of liberation from centuries of oppression. The urgency of their departure, spurred by Pharaoh's reluctant release following the tragic loss of Egypt's firstborn, gave the Israelites little time to prepare, resulting in the observance of the Passover with unleavened bread, a ritual still honored today. As they journeyed into the wilderness, the Israelites were not left unguided. The Bible records that God led them through the desert by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, found in Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 to 22. These divine signs provided both direction and protection, symbolizing God's constant presence with his people. The pillars served practical purposes as well, shielding them from the harsh desert sun and lighting the way in the darkness. Their movement was not random. The route from Ramesses to Succoth was strategically chosen, keeping them within Egyptian territory, yet out of immediate reach of major military roads like the Way of the Philistines, which God deliberately avoided to prevent early conflict with the Philistine armies. Succoth is the first camping ground for the Israelites, where they could be organized and become more of a community. The place for a stop leads to the transition from being enslaved labor to a divinely chosen people on a journey of the spirit and the nation. That ancient Succoth is what today's archaeologists and scholars have bothered to locate, with some placing it in the eastern Nile Delta region in sync with the biblical narration. While there is still much contention as to the actual archaeological evidence, the route from Ramesses to Succoth itself conforms well with geography, historical records of those ancient Egyptian settlements, and escape routes. The modern investigations, recently citing patterns of evidence, show how satellite mapping and regional excavation projects would likely reveal locations where people camped along the journey. Such evidence shows that this terrain would have been passable for a multitude, probably aided in all their movement by the canal networks of the Nile. The first leg of the Exodus journey sets the stage for what would be a decades-long journey. More than physical escape, the initial move was a transformation from oppressed people to a nation, one defined by faith and identity and covenant with God. The pillar of cloud and fire. As the Israelites began their journey into the wilderness, they were led not by human navigation, but by a miraculous phenomenon, God's visible presence in the form of a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night.
The pillar of fire, it is the grace of God.
According to Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 to 22, these divine signs were constant and unrelenting, guiding the Israelites throughout their escape from Egypt. The pillar of cloud served as a shade and direction marker during the intense desert heat, while the pillar of fire illuminated their path and provided warmth in the cold desert nights. This dual manifestation of divine presence served both a symbolic and practical role, demonstrating God's faithfulness and commitment to his people, and ensuring their survival in an otherwise hostile environment. The significance of these pillars went beyond physical guidance. They acted as constant reminders of God's covenant and active participation in Israel's liberation. In a landscape that was barren, unfamiliar, and fraught with danger, the supernatural pillars provided not only protection, but reassurance. The shifting of the cloud to block the Egyptian army in Exodus chapter 14, verses 19 to 20, as the Israelites prepared to cross the Red Sea, revealed its protective function in a moment of great peril. This strategic repositioning of the cloud created a supernatural barrier, giving the Israelites time to escape and reinforcing the belief that their journey was orchestrated and secured by divine will. The spiritual meaning of the pillar of cloud and fire is intricately interwoven into a vast biblical narrative. It speaks of God's omnipresence, guidance, and power to intervene in the natural order of things. In the wilderness journey, this visible manifestation of God became the focus of the people's hope, especially in times of fear and uncertainty. One of the most remarkable features of the Exodus account is the distinction made between the escape of the Israelites from Egypt, who were not merely on a migration route, but a divinely enabled deliverance. For the Israelites, it was the constant reminder that they were not abandoned in the wilderness, but that their ancestral God went with them every step of the way. The pillar, though perceived as a supernatural act of God, has been etymologically investigated by modern scholars in search of possible earthly manifestations, such as atmospheric phenomena or volcanism. However, to be viewed through the lens of faith, it is an unequivocal manifestation of God's working. In the most recent investigations carried out by Patterns of Evidence, the consistent role of the pillar throughout the Exodus journey lent more weight theologically than in suggesting a naturalistic viewpoint. In any perception of faith or symbol, the pillar of cloud and fire remains one of the most prominent symbols of God's presence and supernatural leadership in the biblical record. The route to the sea. After departing from Succoth, the Israelites journeyed through the wilderness, guided by the pillar of cloud and fire, eventually reaching a location called Etham. From there, they turned southward into a rugged and mountainous terrain, a critical turn that led them toward the modern-day Gulf of Aqaba. This region, part of the Sinai Peninsula, is marked by steep cliffs, narrow wadis, valleys, and limited escape routes, making it a challenging path for a massive group traveling on foot. Yet, this detour was divinely directed. According to Exodus chapter 14, verse 2, God instructed Moses to encamp near the sea at a place called Pi-Hahiroth, facing Baal-Zephon, effectively leading the Israelites into what appeared to be a trap, with the sea ahead and Pharaoh's army closing in behind. Geographically, this path leads to the wide, sandy beach of Nuweiba on the eastern coast of the Sinai Peninsula. Surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and the sea on the 4th, Nuweiba fits the biblical description of a place where the Israelites were hemmed in with seemingly no way to escape. This area has gained growing attention among scholars and researchers who suggest it could be the actual site of the Red Sea crossing. The terrain leading to Nuweiba matches the difficult and restrictive geography described in Exodus, offering only a narrow corridor through the mountains, now known as Wadi Watir, that could accommodate a large migrating population. Its strategic topography would have funneled the Israelites into a confined area, just as the biblical narrative portrays. Recent satellite images, as well as geographical studies, including those mentioned in the appropriate patterns of evidence, validate the authenticity of this route. Bathymetric maps of the Gulf of Aqaba illustrate an underwater land bridge going between Nuweiba and the opposite shore in Saudi Arabia. Although the Gulf is generally deep and steep, this section is characterized by a more gradual slope, which some researchers posit could have served as a passageway when waters parted. The ridge underwater could explain how a miraculous crossing on a dry ground could happen according to natural terms, and yet the timing and orchestration still point to supernatural intervention, as in the biblical line. This route's strategic import is attributed not just to its topography, but to the historical context within which it fits. Besides these, ancient records also speak about military bases that the Egyptians established around the vicinity, such as Migdol near the crossing location. Added to this is the recent archaeology interest in Nuweiba. Along with its counterpart in Saudi Arabia, some other chariot finds, along with possible camping evidence, were also unearthed, thus making this route one strong contender of the original Exodus path. The evidence continues to be increasing where scriptural detail coalesces within geographical match and modern investigation, continuing to put together a wonderful case that the Gulf of Aqaba, especially near Nuweiba, does provide the possible location of the Red Sea miracle. The Nuweiba crossing site. The coastal area of Nuweiba, located along the eastern edge of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, has emerged as one of the most compelling candidates for the true location of the Red Sea crossing. Its unique geography, a wide, flat beach surrounded by rugged mountains, fits the biblical description found in Exodus 14, where the Israelites were hemmed in by natural barriers with the sea in front and Pharaoh's army closing in behind. This strategic entrapment described in Scripture would have made escape seem impossible without divine intervention. The only accessible route into the area is through Wadi Watir, a narrow canyon that would have served as a natural funnel, guiding the massive group to the shore while simultaneously limiting their maneuverability, exactly as the biblical narrative portrays. What distinguishes Nuweiba from other proposed crossing sites is the presence of a submarine land bridge beneath the Gulf of Aqaba. Bathymetric studies, underwater topographical mappings, have revealed a relatively shallow underwater ridge stretching from Nuweiba to the opposite shore in Saudi Arabia. This ridge features a more gradual slope on both sides, compared to the typically steep drop-offs elsewhere in the Gulf. According to recent analyses cited in the Patterns of Evidence and GB News articles, this land bridge could have feasibly supported a mass crossing had the waters been supernaturally divided, as the Bible describes. The underwater path is roughly 8 miles long and wide enough to accommodate a large group, aligning closely with the logistics required by the Exodus account. Satellite photographs have also contributed to the viability of Nuweiba as the crossing point. The expansive beach, one of the largest on the Gulf of Aqaba, would easily have been able to accommodate the estimated 2 million Israelites, together with livestock and equipment. It is thus the sole known site along the Gulf, both geographically accessible and big enough to be equal to biblical proportions. Also, the fact that there are ancient fortifications in the vicinity, including those that have been identified as potential remains of Migdol, an Egyptian outpost mentioned in Exodus 14, lends historical authenticity to the site. These archaeological markers indicate that the site might have been under Egyptian domination during the period traditionally dated to the Exodus, adding further background to the Israelite entrapment. While critics persist that final archaeological proof is yet to be needed, the concurrence of geophysical features, biblical alignment, and contemporary science techniques has elevated Nuweiba to a position of prime concern in the recent quest for the Red Sea crossing location. Finding pairs of compatible chariot fragments and other sunken artifacts on both the Egyptian and Saudi side of the Gulf, as was noted recently in exploratory excursions, continues to augment the argument. As additional information arises, Nuweiba remains an unusual case wherein natural geography would appear to dovetail so directly with a miracle from the Bible, providing a venue that is not only feasible, but more and more likely as where the Red Sea parted. Just when the terrain seemed to tell the whole story, something man-made emerged to deepen the mystery. Monumental pillars. In 1978, amateur archaeologist Ron Wyatt made a discovery that would later ignite worldwide interest in the Red Sea crossing narrative. While exploring the Nuweiba beach on the Gulf of Aqaba, Wyatt stumbled upon a large red granite pillar partially buried in the sand. The pillar, standing over 6 feet tall and intricately carved, appeared to be of significant antiquity. Its presence in such an isolated location raised immediate questions. Wyatt believed this monument marked the site where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, commemorating one of the most pivotal miracles in biblical history. What gave this theory greater weight was the discovery of a matching pillar on the opposite shore in Saudi Arabia, suggesting that the two columns may have been placed as boundary markers for the crossing route. While the pillar at Nuweiba was uninscribed when Wyatt found it, the matching Saudi pillar reportedly contained ancient Hebrew inscriptions, referencing significant figures and events such as Moses, Pharaoh, Mizraim, Egypt, death, and Yahweh. According to various reports and photographs from that time, some of which were documented before the pillar's removal by Saudi authorities, these inscriptions were seen as compelling evidence that the monument was linked to the biblical Exodus. The style and construction of the granite columns appeared consistent with ancient commemorative practices, where significant events were marked with stone monuments bearing symbolic inscriptions. The location of these pillars opposite one another on a viable crossing point at the Red Sea has strengthened the argument that Nuweiba may be the true site of the miracle of Exodus 14. A number of scholars, as those showcased in the patterns of evidence, feel that these markers were perhaps ordered by King Solomon, who, while overall has a bad reputation for doing wrong, in the Bible was fond of attempts to preserve Israel's history, discovered in 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 26. The biblical account has it that Solomon made a fleet at Ezion-Geber, near Elath, sites beside the Gulf of Aqaba, thereby implying that he had access and motive to record the crossing of the Red Sea. If this is correct, the pillars may well be tangible artifacts linked directly into the body of Israel's collective memory regarding his deliverance. Skepticism remains among academic circles because there is no official record of the original discovery or any formal review of excavations, but what has kept the curiosity of scholars and biblical historians alike is the consistency of the locations of the pillars, their structure, and the thematic content. As pointed out in the most recent discussion, as captured by GB News, these are also regaining significance in light of new explorations by satellite and underwater to prove the credibility of the Nuweiba route. While authentication remains unproven, the granite pillars serve as mere tantalizing evidence that could be silent sentinels leading to one of the Bible's most famous miracles. Chariot wheels and time capsules. Recent underwater expeditions in the Gulf of Aqaba have unveiled compelling findings that may lend credence to the biblical account of the Red Sea crossing. Divers exploring the seabed near Nuweiba have reported discovering coral-encrusted formations resembling ancient chariot wheels and axles. These artifacts, some exhibiting 4, 6, and 8 spokes, align with the design of Egyptian chariots from the 18th dynasty, a period traditionally associated with the Exodus narrative. The coral growth has preserved the shapes of these objects, offering a tantalizing glimpse into a possible historical event. In addition to these formations, researchers have identified submerged human and horse remains in the vicinity, suggesting a catastrophic event that led to the sudden demise of a large group. These findings have been dubbed the death pool, a term reflecting the area's potential as a mass grave for Pharaoh's pursuing army. The preservation of these remains is attributed to the unique environmental conditions of the region, which inhibit decomposition and allow for long-term conservation of organic materials. Intriguingly, scientists have discovered deep-sea brine pools in the Gulf of Aqaba. Save for that, these hypersaline, oxygen-starved waters hasten the decay of organic matter because it can survive for thousands of years. In fact, the brine pools act as natural time capsules, safeguarding not only biological agents but also clues governing ancient climatic and environmental conditions. The salt drifts at the depths of brine pools on the proposed site for the crossing, thus adding scientific legitimacy to the purported preservation of both artifacts and human remains. There are important signs. However, one has to continue with tempered expectations.
But these kinds of shapes are very typical of coral growth.
There is still open debate among the scientific community as to whether the coral formations were actually chariot wheels, and future studies will have to provide validation for these assertions. Nevertheless, the attraction between archaeological records and the peculiarly different geological features of the Gulf of Aqaba fuels the debate on the historical details of the Exodus event. Echoes across the sea. Recent explorations along the Saudi Arabian coast of the Gulf of Aqaba have unveiled intriguing findings that may bolster the theory of a cross-sea pursuit during the Exodus. Divers have reported discovering coral-encrusted formations resembling ancient chariot wheels and axles, mirroring similar artifacts found on the Egyptian side near Nuweiba. These formations, some exhibiting 4, 6, and 8 spokes, align with the design of Egyptian chariots from the 18th dynasty, a period traditionally associated with the Exodus narrative. The presence of these formations on both sides of the Gulf suggests a possible route taken by the Israelites and pursued by Pharaoh's army. The coral growth has preserved the shapes of these objects, offering a tantalizing glimpse into a possible historical event. However, it's important to note that while these findings are compelling, they remain subject to ongoing debate within the scientific community. And to continue adding to the mystery, submerged human and horse remains have been discovered in the vicinity, indicating some cataclysmic event that wiped out a large number of the population. These findings have been referred to as the death pool, according to the names it brings forth, as part of a mass grave for Pharaoh's pursuing army. Environmental conditions of the area have caused these remains to be preserved because they do not promote the decomposing process, but instead allow the organic material to be conserved for a long time. In spite of all this, these are brilliant discoveries, and one should not get too excited about them. Chariot wheels were identified as coral formations, but it is still hotly debated among scientists. Some more research must be done to consolidate the findings. Still, the combination of archaeological discoveries and strange geological features in the Gulf of Aqaba continues to fuel discussions about the history behind the Exodus story. A location reconsidered. The traditional identification of Mount Sinai places it within Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, notably at Jebel Musa, where the monastery of St. Catherine stands. This site has long been revered by Christian, Jewish, and Islamic traditions. However, recent archaeological explorations and scholarly debates have brought attention to alternative locations, particularly in northwestern Saudi Arabia, challenging long-held assumptions about the mountain's true location. Proponents of the Saudi Arabian theory point to Jabal al-Lawz and its adjacent peak, Jabal Makla.
The Mountain of Moses. So you call this one Jabal Musa?
Jabal Musa.
As potential candidates for the biblical Mount Sinai, these mountains are situated in the ancient land of Midian, where Moses is said to have fled after leaving Egypt and encountered the burning bush. Notably, Jabal Makla features a blackened summit, which some interpret as evidence of the divine fire described in Exodus. Additionally, nearby sites include petroglyphs depicting bovine figures, which some associate with the Golden Calf incident, and a split rock formation believed by some to be the rock Moses struck to bring forth water. These features collectively align with various elements of the Exodus narrative. Just like that, Jabal al-Lawz has now become Mount Sinai, but it remains a controversial identification. Detractors will argue that the evidence is essentially circumstantial and lacks any definitive archaeological basis. Some have further pointed out that the biblical descriptions do not in any way bind a location to Saudi Arabia, holding support for all the traditional sites of the Sinai Peninsula. This debate amplifies how difficult it can be to relate very ancient texts to the physical dimensions of geography, as well as the no less difficult art of their archaeological interpretation. In other words, the historic Mount Sinai in Egypt has not lost any of its impact, but the alternative theory, more especially those that argued for locations within Saudi Arabia, energized scholarly discourse. This certainly warrants future archaeological and anthropological investigations, as new knowledge could come at any moment that will either lend credence to long-time beliefs or open people's eyes to the possibility of changing their minds about times of the past. While scholars debate what's written in stone, what lies beneath the sea might hold even deeper answers. Historical and spiritual significance of the crossing. The story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea has captivated generations as one of the most profound examples of divine intervention in recorded religious history. For believers, it represents God's deliverance, power, and faithfulness, transforming a nation of slaves into a free people destined for covenant with the divine. The parting of the Red Sea is more than a miraculous escape. It is a foundational moment in Judeo-Christian tradition, celebrated annually during Passover and referenced throughout Scripture as a testimony to God's ability to rescue and guide His people. Spiritually, it symbolizes a passage from bondage to freedom, from fear to faith, and from oppression to purpose. Historically, the account has long been met with skepticism by mainstream scholars due to the lack of physical evidence, until recent decades, when underwater and geographical research began aligning more closely with the biblical narrative. Discoveries such as coral-encrusted chariot wheels, submerged human and animal remains, and the death pool of preserved artifacts in the Gulf of Aqaba, as reported in Patterns of Evidence and GB News, have renewed interest in the possibility that this event may have a factual basis. Satellite imagery and bathymetric studies further suggest that a viable land bridge exists beneath the sea at Nuweiba, where the crossing is believed to have occurred, providing a plausible physical mechanism through which a miraculous event could unfold. This coming together of archaeology and scripture is important, not just because it provides possible corroboration of ancient texts, but also because it creates an opportunity for discussion between science and faith. The fact that natural processes, such as the underwater ridge and oxygen-starved brine pools, may have assisted in preserving physical evidence of this event, provides a story where the miraculous and material coexist. These results in no way take away from the theological significance of the event, but instead enhance it through showing that divine action can act through the natural world in remarkable ways. This confluence of the disciplines calls for a richer understanding of the biblical narrative as both spiritual and historical event. Finally, the power of the Red Sea crossing comes from its lasting ability to instill faith and wonder. Whether interpreted as a literal event verified by archaeological finds, or as a richly symbolic allegory grounded in ancient custom, the crossing continues to resonate with ideas of freedom, trust in divine guidance, and the victory of hope over despair. As new evidence comes to light, it calls us to reread ancient texts with new eyes and open hearts, understanding that tales once thought to be strictly spiritual may also leave imprints in the material world. This connection between the sacred and the scientific provides a deeper, more nuanced explanation of one of the Bible's most famous miracles. To this diverse conversation, it is also starting to be seen, by scholars examining ancient Near Eastern literature and parallel cultures for purposes of establishing context for the Red Sea crossing, that in one such document, the Egyptian papyrus entitled The Admonitions of Ipuwer, there exist poetic complaints about devastation, plague, and extensive mortality, referring to, amongst other ideas, chaos, which mirrors the very material of the Book of Exodus. Though its direct relationship to the biblical narrative is controversial, such texts indicate that narratives of national disturbance and divine punishment were not Israelites alone. Moreover, ancient Hebrew poetry in Exodus 15, the Song of the Sea, provides internal literary testimony that the crossing was not merely remembered, but ritualized in Israelite cult, indicating it was seen as a foundation stone of national identity. This ritualization, together with possible archaeological discoveries, exemplifies how memory, belief, and history usually converge to protect events that make a people's beginning and sense. Thanks for watching. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like it, leave a comment with your thoughts or questions, and subscribe so you never miss an update on amazing historical discoveries. Got theories of your own? Drop them below. We'd love to hear them. And if you're ready to keep exploring, click on the next video now showing on your screen. There's so much more to uncover.